Hey everyone, welcome to Lunch and Learn. I'm going to be your host for today, Gregory Goldston. We've got our three sites on the right that we're going to promote as always. We've got our decision support YouTube channel that is going to have a bunch of different content, including some videos coming up regarding the settings XML and all of those individual settings, what they do, what their purpose is, which ones you should and shouldn't touch. Below that, we also have the Decision Solutions Marketplace, which is also connected to the Decisions Forum, so you can access both there and either get questions answered or perhaps some example projects to work with. And below that, we have our wonderful DocBot, which is fantastic at answering design building questions, general inquiries about the Decisions platform, and how specific steps, rules, rule variations, and all that sort of stuff function. For those of you who do not know, we have a new stand-up time as well from 2 to 3 on our business days, Monday through Friday. Basically, anytime that we're open, we'll be running those in addition to our 9:30 to 10:30 a.m. ones. So feel free to pop in if you need some help in the afternoon. So all of that being said, I think we're good to start taking questions now. If you want to start putting them in the chat, just let us know. Uh, Helmet, I see you've got your hand raised. I'll be glad to let you talk. Give me just a moment. I'm going to give it just like a minute for people to start putting questions in there, and then I'll allow you to talk and we'll get started. All right. So, yeah, I'll mute you in a moment here. And while that is going on, let me share my decisions environment screen. So let me get that rolling real quick. There we go. All right, cool, cool, cool. We're in version 9.6, by the way. So if I create a new folder here, I have to specify what I want to allow in that folder. I can just make everything under the default designer folder that gets created with the project, but if you want to create subfolders from there, got to specify them now, which is good for organizing stuff. Okay, I think we're good on that then, and it shut down all my attendees as soon as I switch screens. That's fun to know. Anyways, Helmet, there you go. You should be able to talk now. What you got?
Hey, I hope you've had your coffee this morning. This is a little bit of a tough one.
Oh, you're good. You're good.
Um, okay, so we one of our main applications that we have in Decisions is one that manages our employee onboarding. And so naturally there are a bunch of assignments and tasks that are created and get sent to a number of different business units for them to action and such. Now the problem is that there are several dependencies with these tasks and whatnot. So, like for example, we have a task that goes to the HR department, and the HR department does their thing, and then an employee ID gets created, and then it can move on. And so we have this flow, but we have a dependency, or we have some dependencies that are undesired. And so what I'm attempting to do was to remove those dependencies, but I ran into a situation where I basically needed to use two branching steps in one flow, which I guess I've come to find out is like a hard technological no can do. So I just wanted to ask if you know any ways around that, if I need to possibly get into kind of the asynchronous aspect of flows and how to build those, or if what I'm trying to do just isn't really possible. Also, if this is more complicated than can be broached here in Lunch and Learns, I also understand that. So
It's
that's kind of,
definitely something that having someone see your environment to advise you
I
would be the
know,
best
yeah,
option.
yeah,
Of course, we're always going to recommend support for that. But that being said, you mentioned you're trying to use two branching steps, which again, we don't allow.
right.
So you've got one of these, you got a branch step, and then you've got a merge step at the end. What is the purpose of using both branch steps? Because that might be something that we can work around, like in an ideological sort of way.
Am I able to show you any kind of like pictures or like I have a diagram basically that I'm trying to work off of?
Not on Lunch and Learn. That would have to
Okay.
go to support for that because we can't put our, customers' stuff onto YouTube.
That's fair. Okay, well, effectively, we branch into three branches,
Okay.
um, and then two of the branches need to or I'll let you do that. Yeah. So branch, yeah. So step one and step two and step three.
Okay. And you've got each one of these
One,
going
two, three.
differently.
Perfect. Yeah. Now, step three at the bottom there
Hmm.
is just a number of sequential assignments that can happen kind of at any point. But the top two, let's say this top one is system access and this middle one is HR.
Okay.
Um, Basically, we have a subsequent task after that top one for our telecommunications department, but I want that top one to also branch off into an. Let me re-explain this. How do I explain this? Basically, I need that top one to branch again, and I need subs. Yeah, this is a tough one. Yeesh. I'm not sure
So
if I'll be able to explain this without showing you the diagram.
I gotcha. So you've got something here though that you need to split again for another parallel process.
Basically, yeah, yeah.
Okay, I
And
see what
so,
you're saying.
is string match kind of what you typically look for there?
I'm just doing that to get a step that I know branches without breaking decisions. I'm not saying
And
that that's
actually,
the option.
it's not from that string branch. It's I'm trying to branch from that top placeholder step one.
Okay, and you're trying to branch to two different outcomes to do
Yeah.
different things.
And then there's another complicating factor is basically on the top and the middle placeholder step, I want both of them to have one branch that come together to a shared subflow.
Okay.
So if you put a string match step where the top placeholder is and the middle placeholder is, also if anybody has a less complicated question, that's also fine.
Oh no, we're letting the QAs fill up. We'll get to everyone.
Okay, all right.
It's all good. It's all good.
Yeah. So basically then this top string branch step and this middle string branch step, yeah, they both need to go to a shared branch. Yep, just like that. But they also need to go to their own unique tasks that happen as well. See what I'm,
Depending upon,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So that top one outputs a network ID and it can move on to the telecom task, which is its own unique task. It that only requires the network ID. But then this middle placeholder one that you put where they both combine into one, it requires the output of both of the initial string match steps there.
Okay.
See what
I
I'm
see what
sorry? See what I'm
I
saying?
do. I do
Yeah,
see what you're saying. This is a very tricky sort of
I know.
setup. My inclination, at least my first thought in this, is setting up this process as trigger flows and having your string match more along the lines of, let's see here, more along the lines of a whatchamacallit, like a set entity state sort of thing. So if you have separate entities that are going through these states, you're waiting on certain triggers to occur where they both have to hit that, or maybe, one has to hit that particular process for that processing. Another option is you can put more branch steps and merge steps inside of subflows. So
And
you can
that's
have that
yeah,
process occur within there, and then you don't run into the issue of trying to drag two of them
multiple.
into the same one. Yeah, which would accomplish it. You just have to be very careful with how you're setting that up, but it is doable that way.
Okay.
Yeah, so if it's going to pass in here, you need that parallel processing to occur. You have that occur inside of the subflow, and you can output two different outcomes from that subflow that go to different parts of the branch.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I see
Mm,
what you're saying. Um, hmm. Okay. Yeah. And I guess one thing I was looking into was kind of this asynchronous idea. I mean, I'm no asynchronous programmer, that's for sure. But is that something that might be might be utilized here, or am I misunderstanding?
That there are too many factors to say yes or no, but let me kind
Okay,
of
yeah.
give you some upsides. The upsides of having something asynchronous is that you can run it in the background while other processes are occurring and you don't have to wait for it to,
Uh-huh.
occur. A great example of that is the run flows for list step, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with this one.
No, I'm not.
All right. It's very cool. It takes in a list of items and then it has a flow that processes every single item in that list according to whatever logic you set up here. So everything
Hmm.
goes in, gets processed there. You can have rules in here that, filter it out. So if the items are different, you can have different things go on. And what's special about this as well, you can choose what kind of behavior it's processed in, whether it's a thread job, whether it's an async and wait. So you wait for all of them to occur
Hmm.
asynchronously, and then after they've all processed, they pass out. There are some downsides to this, however, and the first one is that if you run this all asynchronously, not with the async and wake, but just all in the background, you cannot pass out data because that has to complete on a separate thread and the flow will continue. It can't go back and get that data after the step is processed.
Gotcha.
You also cannot put forms like tasks inside of the run flows for list. So if you're doing your
Yeah, we
assignments in
we
here,
definitely
you
need
can't do it
tasks.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, you would have to process it differently. You can set up tasks to be run in asynchronous subflows. So the start linked flow async step will allow you to pick a flow that runs asynchronously, and you can assign tasks here while the rest of the stuff goes on. However, once again, if you need outputs from what they put down and you're not just saving it to a database somewhere, but use it
Uh-huh.
later in the flow, you can't get that here because this flow is going to process immediately. So it depends on your process whether or not async will work here or not. It's something to consider, but I think you may want to create a support ticket and have them take a look before you settle on that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. I think I could use some support, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have their email or would you like me to throw that in the
No,
chat?
yeah, I definitely have their email.
Okay,
Thank you very
cool.
much.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Alrighty. Yeah, thanks for the question. Much
Uh-huh.
appreciated. Um, Jeremy, I saw you said I have accomplished something similar by using a subflow on one of the branches. Yes, you can absolutely. And Vitali saying the same thing. You can probably put a second branch step into the subflow. Yes, those are
Yeah.
definitely different options for trying to accomplish this feat right here, which would allow for the proper process. You have your branch. Now, one thing I'm not sure I would advise, and I would need to test this first, is I don't know if I would put here, let me just create a new flow here. I don't know if I would put a branch here and then have that run to two different outcomes
And
before like
that's
a merge step.
yeah.
Now, it's possible. I'm not saying you can or cannot. It is not something that I have personally tested yet, and it's not something I can recommend until I test that and see what consequences there might be. But I just
Uh-huh.
want to specify that.
Gotcha.
So, yeah, you can create different outcomes, maybe merge them and then use like a rule or something to process it. That would be fine and split it that way. But yeah, I would need to test that.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, sure thing.
All right.
All right. I'm not seeing any other questions yet. Just some insightful comments into this particular query. So I will wait just a little bit longer here because we don't have a lot of people joining this. Yeah, here we go. Here are the participants. Yeah, okay. So I'll exit out of this and I can talk a little bit about what I've been working on. It's kind of tough to show the environment, but Decisions has, here, I'll draw. Here, I can actually annotate, can't I? Decisions has a file which you are probably all familiar with called the settings XML, which basically has a bunch of different configurable options for how to run the decisions environment in particular ways. So there are, as of version 9.6, 121 lines in the settings XML of different settings that you can configure. And I am making a video series that is going to go over what every single one of those does, as well as ones that you should avoid. So For example, we have one, of course, most people know about the SMTP settings, that sort of setup. But another option you have is if you have errors that occur within the system, like different system validation errors, you can choose not to show those in a pop-up and instead just compile an email to someone by simply toggling one setting from false to true. And then you don't have that show up in your environment, and it goes to whichever email you set in line 41, which is going to be the I don't remember the exact name of it. It's not an administrator email, but it's something else. So that's what this video series is going to be covering. And it's going to be broken up into different parts because I think someone trying to watch through a video series of 121 different settings is probably going to maybe drain them just a bit, you know. So yeah, that's what we're working on here. I see we have some more people that have joined, so I will give it a little bit more time for people to put their questions in. Um, let's see. Let me answer Vitali's question. I have two servers in a cluster. How can I make sure they are synced after I do a change? Uh, for example, I changed flow in server one, and the person who logs in server two does not see the change. That here, I'm going to unmute you, and we can talk about possible causes to that real quick, because there's actually more than one way that that problem might occur. So let me unmute you. All right, Vitali, what you got?
Okay. So basically, if that makes sense, they are in containers.
All
They're
right.
in a cluster. So what happens, even it doesn't mean if I make change to a workflow, for example, if I need to give somebody permissions to a folder, I can see those changes, but person who apparently logs into second server, which you cannot control, does not see those changes.
Okay. There are a few different options that could be going on with this particular cluster container setup. So the first thing is you have to make sure that you're referencing the same database, but that's just in the setup, right? You can't be saving it to two different
Mhm.
databases. Another thing you want to make sure is that when you're configuring the Redis server to handle the caches, that you have the right connection string with that. Because if you're installing Reddit on localhost, it's going to be something like 63. I don't remember it off the top of my head, but it starts with 6300 as far as how you connect to the Redis server. And if both of those aren't operating, it's not going to cache that information and be able to tell you which server has what information. So server two going in may not see what's going on with server one, and vice versa. Now Redis does not hold all the cache information. It only holds enough information as a lookup mechanism to tell you which cache it's being held in. So if you are not properly caching those objects individually in the shared file storage, perhaps, like for example, if you don't have file storage connected where one server has the correct permissions to access it and the other one does not, then you are not going to be accessing those shared files for those things to get updated. So, again, there are a lot of different reasons this could occur. There's no one answer fits all. But the things I would check are permissions on the file storage, including the service account that's running it. Because if the service account running decisions is just the default system account and you're running it between two different ones, which I know in a container environment that's going to be a little bit different with root user and ensuring the permissions are set up correctly there. But you want to make sure that they both have access to that same file storage. And I want to make another thing clear. In the environment file, right? Because if you're loading this from a container, I'm assuming you're going to have an environment file that you're setting up. If you don't specify the shared file storage, it goes to the default one. And if it's not specified, then you have to configure your Docker Compose file to search what the default file storage would be for that. Otherwise, it's going to be looking in the wrong place.
And that makes sense. Do you have document on Redis configuration?
We do actually. I can
Okay.
put that into the chat. Let me get that real quick. Pardon me for just a moment here. Uh, yeah, it's under enterprise, clustering. Redis is particularly for clustering. It's not, yeah, here we go. I think you're gonna want to download the redis.cli. you want Redis stack, I believe, though the documentation will specify that in particular because there are two different versions you can download. You have the open source version, and then you have like an enterprise version. Both should function as they um, as long as they follow the information specified in the above clustering setup, then you should be fine. I'm trying to throw this into the chat. Sorry, I'm looking for it. Here we go. There you go. You should be able to see that now.
Yep.
Yeah. Hope that answers your question. If you have more clustering questions, please let me know. I'll be glad to assist and help you set that up to make sure that's functioning properly.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Yeah. All right, Bradley. I see you've got your hand raised. Let you talk real quick. Sorry, it keeps getting rid of people. Like, you'd think it'd just be a little bit easier. All right. You should be able to talk now. What you got?
Hey, Gregory. This was an issue that I had in version 8, and I don't know if it got version fixed in V9, so I just wanted to check in. Is there a way on a form to tell if any validations exist, like just a Boolean or a count, anything of that nature? What I have happening, or what I'm trying to do, is that when a person clicks submit on the form to send it on to the next person, if there are errors, I want to show an errors tab in a tab container. I want to give them a pop-up with instructions on what to do. If there are no errors, I just want to close the form and show the end form. What I'm having to do now is I show a pop-up and I say, if the form is still there, do this. If the form is not there, then it's done and move on. It just seems a little clunky.
I see what you're saying. So I think the issue, if I recall this correctly, is you wanted a separate tab of errors coming up that would dynamically create that tab, right? Is that?
Well, yeah, so I'm using I think it's called the all validations control. So I have a tab container, and then I have a hidden tab called errors.
Okay.
Or maybe display validation. If you do validation, that should come up.
I'll pull up the tab container real quick, and
Okay,
then I'll
sure.
pull up the validation stuff.
So I have the tab hidden by default. When the person clicks submit, I'm showing the error tab regardless of if there's validations or not, showing a pop-up, and then either the form disappears because there's no validations or it stays there. Yep, that's the one. All form validations, which is a great control, right? It's much better than hovering on the button. You can scroll through all the validations, but I just want to make it a little bit more user friendly, so they don't kind of have to decipher what's going on.
So let me test this real quick. So the issue
Sure.
with this is that it's not functioning. Hold on, let me grab a grid because grids just make things easier. The problem is it's not functioning in a user readable way. Is that what's going on?
No, the control works fine. It's just what happens when there are validations versus when there's not validations, right? When there are errors, when there are not errors. So I'm using some required fields, but I also have some fields that, okay, if you put a value here, then I also need a value here. Like I have some fields that are it's either or both. Neither or both, sorry. Right? Either both have to be blank or both have to be filled in. So that's not obviously something that's set on the control. So I have to do an active form flow when they click submit. I check, are both of these null or both of them populated? If it throws a validation error, then the errors tab opens, which shows the error is fine. And then I have a pop-up that say, go to the errors tab, review those, fix those, and then click submit again.
Okay.
The problem is, if there are no validations, everything is great and filled in as it should be. I have two options, right? I can include information in that pop-up to say, which I do now. I say, if the form has disappeared, then your data has been submitted. Because if I don't say that, even if there are no validations, they're still going to get that pop-up, right? So I have no way to not show that pop-up. I have no way to say if there are validations in the active form flow. I have no way to say if there are validations, don't show a pop-up.
So you need to be able to check whether it's populated or not, and that's
right. Whether to check
there's
just if there's any validations at all on the form, whether that's, like I said, whether that's a Boolean, whether that's a count of validations, just some way to check, do validations exist? And then if they do this thing. If they don't, do this thing.
Let me try something here real quick, because you
Okay.
may have already given this a try, but my first thought is because there is such a control as this, that this information might be accessible from the active form flow and usable.
Yeah, the only thing I saw with how I did it, I only saw that it's enabled or disabled. I think those were the two options. There was no value or count.
Let me look something real quick.
Sure.
I'll get a create data step. We'll just pull stuff in here. So
Happy to be wrong.
let me put. Let's see. So I will actually want to pull that from flow data and see what's in here. So form validation issues, that's a control value. And the only thing it specifies is enabled or visible. So that is not going to give us information regarding whether it exists or not. Do we have an internal service step that can do this? Because that has to be coming from somewhere. If it's not populating within that.
Yeah, I would think so. That's my thinking was this decisions knows if there's validations or not.
Get validation issues, get validation issues. Is there any context that's needed for this? This feels like this doesn't feel right. I'm
think I
gonna
looked at that
debug it.
one. I think that's the system validation.
That makes more sense.
I think I tried that one as well. Like this looks promising, and then not so much.
Form designer service, forms. Let me check form service actually. Form service assigned form. Get form data, get session service, get image. Startup validations. I'll check that in a moment.
Okay.
And that needs the rule session info, which is going to be form session info ID. So I need to have another internal service that creates an active form session using this form in order to use that. Rule session info, I'm gonna guess is referencing the rule flow here because I'll need to confirm. That's the only thing I can think of that defaultly like creates a rule within.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's see here. And it has no way to check whether validations exist or not because you can't dynamically populate that. But what does that other control do? Let me leave this here for a moment.
Sure.
I'll come back to this. I think I can. Control validation display. What does this do? Validation source. Interesting. So this one's picked one by one. That'd be a little time consuming. But let's see if it at least shows what we're hoping to find. Oh. Great data. Let's see if this functions. Drag that over. Not debug. My bad. Force a habit. Control validation issues. Really? That's not fun. Okay. So what it's getting them from is got to be whatever the default service is. Like, that's just for the form. That's the form designer. That's going to be different. I will have to look into that. I don't know off the top of my head how to actively determine whether they exist or not. The only way I could think to do it is my thought goes to messing around with the clear validations setting. Because what that would do is it would force a clear on any validations that you've created and the system ones populate on their own. So I'm wondering if there could be some form of like excluding some into the other, but It's a very vague idea. I would have to look into this.
Hmm. So like I determine if there's a validation on my custom configure my custom setup. If there's a validation, okay,
I'm not certain. It's a
Sure.
very vague idea. I don't have a direction with that. I'm just trying to think on possible solutions.
no, that's fair enough. I appreciate that.
Yeah,
Could you
sure thing.
do some weird, apologies for interrupting. Could you do some weird loop around with an outcome path scenario where the outcome path comes back into the form itself? I'm on the validation. If you go to the documentation site and look at validation, there's like a outcome path scenario. What if you looped that back into itself and then that thing populated? I know that's kind of an odd loop.
Validation. I'm looking. So validation's overview.
Yeah, and then you scroll like 3/4 of the way down. There's one that says like we're talking about how to get outcome paths. I mean, it doesn't give you a lot of information, but I've seen stuff like that used before where you take the outcome path of a validation and you loop it into the same form, and you can use that to populate something. If there are none, nothing would be populated, and if there are things, things would be populated. I'm not sure how that trigger would work on re-triggering the form to reload that information, but I mean, it is a design paradigm that might be worth investigating.
Interesting. Yeah. Let me put this in. That looks promising. Let me put this into the chat real quick. Yep. Thank you. Yeah. So I was talking about instead of having kind of like a separate tab, it looks like it would kind of loop into its own validation sort of form that would capture those validations and loop back. And if there were no validations, then it would instead just complete. That's what it looks like from an initial
Okay.
overview here.
Okay, I think I'm understanding that. And I guess maybe just from a high level standpoint, like this doesn't seem like an unusual behavior that you would need to have happen.
No, I'm with you. I feel like you should be able to see what validations are present at runtime on the form. That doesn't seem
Yeah.
like a hard
Yeah.
ask.
And that, I mean, that validations display control works wonderfully. It's just I'd like to be able to gather more information from that so I know how to end the form. Right. So if they click submit and everything's great, I want to have
Yep.
a different outcome than if it's not. Okay, yeah, I'll look into this documentation and think about that that option. So I appreciate that. Thanks, Robert.
Yeah.
Thanks, Gregory.
Yeah, absolutely. Glad to help.
All right.
Alrighty. So once again, we'll give it a few more minutes, and if we don't have any questions, we'll just wrap it up a bit early. So I'll just save this. I want to play around with that because it's interesting that that doesn't get provided in the information. I don't want to save that. Here we go. So yeah, I'm not sure if I have any other current projects going on that are really like facing towards some of the new features yet, though. I would like to get involved in some. I'm sure you all have seen like you can connect at the ends of steps now, which is this is so much fun. If you haven't seen this, I'm sure most of you already have, but I don't know. I just want to show it that you can create at the corners now of steps. I know this was in 9.5. This isn't 9.6, but it's just so much fun and definitely helps lay out things better. Speaking of connecting, one thing that is not as well documented is that you can specify what kind of lines you want connecting everything in your flow. If you go to properties over here and then go under settings, actually, let me see if it's advanced. It is advanced. So the shape defaults, if you set the link line type to direct, you can get actually angled lines inside of your decisions flows here, which may or may not just make things look a little bit nicer in your environment. And I can just put one in here. You can see how it matches up there and drags around a little bit differently. Alrighty, I don't see any more questions, so we're gonna wrap this up and hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you all for attending. Appreciate it.